All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. So first of all, to thank today's sponsors, to thank Dovi and Nina Elman, our Talmud Torah sponsors, for the month of Teves, for dedicating all of the Shiurim and Drushos this month in honor of their daughter Ayelet becoming a Bas Mitzvah. We hope that Emeret Hashem, she continues to blossom into a true Bas Yisrael. We also dedicate our learning in the Zechus of Refuah Shalema for Ruchama Aviva Bas Shein Lachana, and the shir this morning is also dedicated by Isaac and Brenda Samuel in the Zechus of Refuah Shalema for Esther Bas Fega. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, Kol Cholei Yisrael will have a complete and enduring refuah. And also with that, let us begin. So we are picking up in Meretz Hashem. Today's daf is Lamed Beis 32, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem at the Mishnah on Lamed Aleph Lamed Beis. You actually have two Mishnayos, the two bottom Mishnayos on Lamed Aleph Lamed Beis. To do a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. So says the Mishnah, Chametz shenafla alav mapolas. I know, Bo said that I still owe you the halacha concerning the mashkin, right? The collateralized chametz, which Emeret Hashem will have to come back to. I'll keep on my running list, but I worry that if we don't do it, if we don't move forward today, we'll lose out. But suffice it to say, many of the principles that we espoused in yesterday's daf do in fact find their expression in the halacha l'maisa. Okay, but we will Emeret Hashem see. Chametz shenaf alav mapolas. If you have chametz, that mapolas also means literally a pile of rubble. Pile of rubble collapses upon chametz. Harihu kimavuar. The fact that the chametz is inaccessible and buried by rubble essentially makes it as if it is destroyed. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, well, it's not just enough for the chametz to be buried by rubble. The chametz must be buried by rubble, but also inaccessible by a dog. So it's so buried that halacha l'maisa, a dog would not be able to access it. That's when halacha l'maisa is considered to be quote unquote destroyed. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chisda, v'tzarech shivata b'liba. It was an interesting halacha. Rav Chisda says, by the way, even if it's buried by rubble, that by itself is not enough. You also have to go ahead and do bittul. You have to do bittul. You have to go ahead and make it hefker in your heart. So the Rashi points out over here why is that. It's the first wide line of Rashi. Tzarech shivata b'libo. Shema yifkach hagal b'moed v'nimtza over alav. Because we both said the concern is what happens if the rubble is removed over the course of Yom Tiv. If the rubble is removed and the chametz is there, you may come to go ahead and you would be over on the Isser of chametz. Therefore, in order to go ahead and ensure that even if the rubble is removed and the chametz once again becomes accessible, that halacha l'maisa, again, you're not in violation of anything. You have to make it hefker as well. So Tana kama chafisas hakelev. So the Gemara says, by the way, how deep in the ground do you have to put something in order that a dog would not be able to access it? Because most remember again, Shigam Neil said that even if chametz is buried by rubble, that doesn't automatically make it inaccessible. It's only considered to be inaccessible if a dog would not be able to reach it. So the Gemara says, and tell me, how deep does something have to be buried in order that it's inaccessible by a dog? 3 tfachim. Amar Rav Acha Rav Yosef Rav Ashi. Hada Amar Shmuel Ksafim Ein Lahem Shmira Ela Bekarka. Mi Ba'ilan Shlosha Tfachim Olam. So we'll say now, interestingly enough, Rav Acha Rav Yosef said to Rav Ashi, when Shmuel says before, we'll say this is another discussion that the Gemara brings up above Mitzvah, that if you go ahead and you are guarding money for someone, the best way to guard money is to bury it. So the Gemara says, so how deep do you have to bury money? So the Gemara says, because after all, Shmuel says, Ksafim Elim Shmira El Bekarka. If you look at Rashi, I will say, second wide line in Rashi, Elim Shmira El Bekarka, Ve'imlo Naslan Bekarka Va'avdu, Pshirhi Etzlo, V'chayev D'shor Mechinim Chay Pshir. So I'll say to the point that if you're guarding money for someone, and you did not bury it in the ground. They're talking about coinage right now, right? You did not bury it in the ground, that you would be chayiv for negligence. you would be obligated for negligence, liable for negligence. So else is the Gemara says, "Mi ba'inan shlosha tefachim ulo." Do you need to bury money 3 tefachim in the ground or not? To which the Gemara says, no. Amar li hacha mishum recha ba'inan shlosha tefachim. Hacha mishum ichsuye me'inahu velo ba'i shlosha. It's really 2 different things. By chametz, the reason you have to bury chametz more than 3 tefachim into the ground is because we don't want a dog to come along and dig up the chametz. Or I should say differently. The reason when we say that in order for chametz to be inaccessible if it's buried by rubble, that it has to be buried by at least 3 tefachim of rubble, that's because we don't want a dog accessing it and digging it up. That's the concern. So up to 3 tefachim, or within, like say, a shallow rubble of less than 3 tefachim, the dog could smell it and dig it up. By money, interestingly enough, the reason you have to bury it is in order to go ahead and hide it away from anyone else. If you hide it away, therefore that kind of precludes the possibility of it being stolen or absconded with. So therefore, I'm going to say you don't need 3 tefachim. Right? 3 tefachim is a din in cent. It's how deep do you have to go ahead and bury it in order for the money to be safe. Kama. Amarafram Bar Papa Misichra Tefach. So sorry, Rafram Bar Papa from Sichra. Sichra is the Rashi says the name of a place. Tefach. All you need to do is bury the money 1 tefach into the ground, and that is enough. And that is enough. Good. I will say now, new Mishnah. Now, this topic of the Mishnah is this new Mishnah is going to take us for a little while. And it's really quite a fascinating Mishnah. Ha'ochel trumas chametz bepesach. Supposed to listen to this. A person eats truma that is chametz on Pesach. So I'll say a little bit of context here or background. Remember, truma is the portion given to the kohen. The halacha is that a non-kohen, is not permitted to eat truma. What happens if a non-kohen eats truma? So if it's b'mezid, it could be a chiyuv misa. If it's b'shogeg accidentally, which is what we're really focusing on over here, person eats truma b'shogeg, they have to pay keren plus a chomesh. They have to pay back the principal plus an additional fifth penalty payment. Okay, that's general truma. Now, Rabbi, we come to a situation where halacha l'maisa, a person eats truma, which is chametz on Pesach. So now the shaila is, what's the liability for this act of consumption? So what's the halacha? B'shogeg, mishalim keren v'chomesh. If you did it b'shogeg, you go ahead and you pay the keren, the principal, plus the additional penalty fifth. B'mezid, if you consumed truma, which is chametz on Pesach intentionally, pater mitashlumin, there is no obligation for compensation. You have no obligation to repay the kohen, umidme eitzim, and from the value of firewood. Now, obviously, we'll discuss this concept of the value of firewood. It has to do with the following scenario. This is, let's say a person goes ahead and eats truma tameya, right? The Kohen, my next door neighbor Kohen has truma, but his truma is tameh. I consume that truma accidentally. So we'll say in that case, so remember the truma itself was not edible by the Kohen. But interestingly enough, what do you do with truma tameh? You burn it. But the interesting halacha by truma tameh is that halacha l'maisa, when burning it, one is permitted to get benefit from the act of burning. So, for example, while I'm burning the truma, I can go ahead and heat up my food on top of that fire. So that's what it says, Demei Eitzim, from the value of firewood. That represents the benefit that one could get when destroying the truma. So therefore, we'll say what the Mishnah teaches me is that according to this opinion, that we'll see those who will argue, if a person eats truma, which is chametz on Pesach, if he did it b'shogeg, he pays keren and chomesh, the principal plus the additional penalty fifth. If he did it intentionally, then he doesn't have to go ahead and pay at all, even demei eitzim. Let's analyze. Says the Gemara, Tanan Hasam, ha'ochel truma b'shogeg mishalim keren v'chomesh. So we'll say here the Gemara is quoting a Mishnah, and the Mishnah over here which is from Maseches Trumas, discusses general prohibited truma consumption, or is illegal truma consumption. Person goes ahead, now this is from the Yisrael, a non-Kohen goes ahead and eats truma, b'shogeg, unintentionally, mishalim karen b'chomesh, he'll pay principal plus a fifth. We'll say that is halacha l'maisa. Echad ha'ochal ve'echad ha'shosa, whether you're eating truma, drinking truma, top of lamed beis, echad hasach, right, whether you're anointing truma. So we'll say however you're benefiting from the truma, whether you're eating it, whether you're drinking it, whether it's oil and you're smearing it on you. Echad truma tamea ve'echad truma tahora mishalim chomesh. Right, whether you're going ahead and consuming truma tamea or truma tahora, you are always going to go ahead and pay the principal plus the penalty fifth. Not only that, the chumsha. So here's what's interesting. Let's say you go ahead and you designate. So now let's say you consume the truma. We're going to see that when you consume truma, you repay back in produce. You repay in produce. So let's say now I consume the truma and now I'm repaying the produce and I'm paying back the additional chomesh and then I consume that chomesh, I consume that fifth. So I pay an additional fifth on that fifth that I consumed. And we'll discuss that in greater depth. So the Gemara said, let me ask a question. Kishu mishalim lefi mida mishalim or lefi damim mishalim? Ask a general question. When you consume truma, so we'll say I illegally consumed truma belonging to a kohen, how do I pay back? Do I pay back, listen to this interesting shayla, do I pay back lefi mida, in accordance with, we'll call it weight or measure, or lefi damim, or according to value? According to value. So we'll say this in general is an interesting shayla that comes up whenever you have to repay items. But let's say, to take a very simple example, let's say I go ahead and consume I consume a pound of truma olives, for argument's sake. So we'll say, let's say at the time of consumption, a pound of truma olives was worth $50. It was worth $50. So now I consume it, I have to pay back the kohen. Now it's time for me to pay back the kohen. And let's say the price of olives went up. A pound of olives is worth $100. So the shayla is, what am I chayiv to pay back? Am I chayiv to pay back a pound of olives, even though now the value of what I'm paying back is more than the value of what I consumed? Or am I chayiv just to pay back the value? I consumed $50, I'm paying you back $50. That's the shayla of lefi mida mishalim or lefi damim mishalim. Do I go ahead and pay back the measure, or do I pay back the value? So it says, let's analyze this. Kol heicha demei kara shavya arba zuzah levasov shavya zuzah lo tibay lecha devadai ki demei ikara mishalim lefi damim delo gara megazlas. Let's listen to this. Everyone agrees in the following situation, that in a situation that from the beginning, let's say the item I consumed was worth 4 zuz. And now let's say the value of that particular type of item depreciated and is only worth a zuz. Everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, when paying back, I pay back based on the time or based on the amount that I consumed. Or I say differently, I pay back based on the value at the time that my illegal act was committed. Because the Gemara says, because in this case, I'm no different than a thief. Because what's the halacha by a thief? Disnan, kol hagazlanin mishalmin kishas hagzela. But this is a very important halacha. Thieves pay back in accordance with the value of the item at the time it was stolen. But that is halacha l'maisa, which is actually quite fascinating. So if you steal an item, so I have to pay back. If there's some type of change in value of the item, the amount that I owe the aggrieved party is locked in at the time of the theft. So kiti bailacha, where does the shaila come up? The meikara shavya zuzah labashov shavya arba. So we'll say, so the interesting shaila comes up in the file. What about in the case of appreciation? What happens if the item that the truma that I consumed was worth a zuz at the time of consumption, but now when I want to pay it back, it's worth 4. So we'll say, so what's the shaila? lefi mida mishalim. So do we say, you know what? The truth is we don't really look at what the value is. Rather, we look at what the measure is. If you ate a pound of olives, you pay back a pound of olives. And to a certain degree, we're uninterested in the value of that pound. That's not what occupies our mind right now. Damarle, griva achal, griva mashal. Griva is a measurement. I ate a griva, I have to pay back a griva. I ate a pound, you have to go ahead and pay back a pound. Odama, lefi damim mishalim. Or maybe I should go ahead and pay back in accordance with financial amount. Achal, so the Gemara says, bezuza achal, bezuza mishalim. Then we'll say halacha l'maisa. No, we look at the value of what I consumed. I consumed a zuz worth of olives, and ultimately, again, it's a zuz that I have to go ahead and pay back. Because if I think about this, if you make me pay back a pound of olives, then it turns out that at least from a value perspective, I am paying back more than what I took, right? I took one zuz worth of olives. The pound of olives now appreciated. If you make me give back a pound of olives, I'm now paying back 4 zuz for a 1 zuz crime. Rav Yossi will say first white line lam bezim dalif. So we'll say it's a yisod is the kshaila. Rav Yosef tashma achol grogeres shilim lo tamarim tavo alav bracha. So we'll say now listen to this. So the Gemara is going to try to. So this is the first kasha that we're dealing with over here. Lefi damim or lefi mida. When you go ahead and you illegally consume truma and you have to pay back that which you have consumed, how do you pay back? The value or the measurements? It says the Gemara, listen to this. So Rav Yosef quotes a brayso. Achol grogeres v'shilin lo tamarim. Let's say I went ahead and I ate grogeres. Grogeres, we'll say, are dried figs. I consumed dried figs of truma, v'shilin lo tamarim. But I repay the kohen with fresh figs, fresh dates. So what's the halacha? Tavalav bracha. So I get a bracha. Chazal are very happy with me because essentially what I'm doing over here is I'm consuming something that is, we'll call it of lesser value, and paying back with an item of higher value. So I ate dried figs, I'm paying back with fresh dates. Tavalav bracha. A blessing should come upon me. So says the Gemara, so if you say that halacha l'maisa in general, when you pay back in accordance with measurements, not values. Or if you ate a pound, you pay back a pound. So therefore, again, amatu lahachi tavalav bracha. The achal griva, the grogeres, the shavya zuza, the kayohev griva, the timarim, the shavya arba. I understand why Chazal are happy with me. Why Rabbi saying? Because listen to this. If we say that you pay back, if you pay back in measurement, in the same measurement you consumed, then this is why Chazal are happy with me. I ate a pound of grogros, and I'm paying back a pound of dates. Then I will say a pound of dates are worth more than a pound, ultimately, again, of grogros. So Chazal are happy with me. You ate a pound, you have to go ahead and pay back a pound, but you chose to pay back with an item of higher value. That's very nice of you. That's very nice of you. But if at the end of the day, you pay back the value of what you consumed, see, Rabbi say value is value is value. Amai tava love bracha. Why do I get a bracha from the rabbis? Achal bezuza, achal bezuza kamash. I'm sorry, bezuza achal bezuza kamashalim. See, Rabbi say I ate a zuz and I'm paying back a zuz. The fact that I ate a zuz of grogros and I'm paying back a zuz of tamarim doesn't make any difference. The value of what I consume and the value of what I'm paying back is the same amount. See, when the Gemara sees this lashon of tava alav bracha, it sounds like I'm doing something more than what I would normally be required to do. So if you tell me that at the end of the day, mishalim lefi mida, under normal circumstances, halacha l'maisa, you pay back the amount, the measurement of what you consumed. So if I consumed, a pound of grogros and I pay back a pound of tamarim, I understand why Chazal say tavalav bracha, shkoyach to me. Because in essence, I'm really paying back more than what I consumed. But if I go ahead and I pay back the value of what I consumed, so if I go ahead and I ate $10 worth of grogros and I pay back $10 worth of tamarim, what's tavalav bracha? I've just paid back exactly what I've consumed. Is the fact that I repaid it in a different kind of item, the value is the same. To which the Gemara says, no. Amar Abaye, the olam lefi damim mishalim. Abaye says, well, it could very well be that normally you pay back the value of what you consumed. So why do we say tavalav bracha? Va'amai tavalav bracha. Da'achal midi de lo kafetz ale zivine v'kamashali midi de kafetz ale zivine. Because Rabbi say, you eat something that buyers don't jump to purchase, and you repaid with something that buyers do jump to purchase. In other words, Rabbi say, for the Kohen, it is much easier to sell tamarim than it is to sell grogros. So you went ahead and I consumed grogros, I consumed dried figs, and I paid him back with tamarim. And for the Kohen, tamarim are much more liquid, right? It's much easier for him to sell tamarim than it is for him to sell grogros. That's why it's tava alav bracha. Okay, so if Rabbi say there's no raya, we're still left with the same question about halacha lemaisa. When you illegally consume truma, how are you paying back? Are you paying back we'll call it the value or the volume? Value or volume? Are you paying back the value of what you consumed or the measurement, the volume of what you consumed? So it says in Martanan, let's analyze this again. Look at our Mishnah. Ha'ochel trumas chametz bepesach. If a person ate Trumas chametz, right? Truma, which is chametz on Pesach. What's talacha? B'shogig mishalim keren v'chomesh. So if he did it accidentally, he pays keren v'chomesh. So let's analyze this. I amrit b'shlam alafi mida mishalim shapir. So we'll say, if you say that when you consume truma, you pay back the volume, the measurement of what you consumed, then this case makes sense. Eli I amrit lefi damim mishalim. But I will say, if you say that when you consume truma, you pay back the value of what you consumed, that's a problem. Why? Chametz bepesach bar damim hu. Chametz on Pesach has no value. And therefore, we'll say, if you pay back the value of what you consumed, chametz on Pesach is absolutely valueless. And if that's the case, halacha l'maisa, if you pay back value, then when you consume chametz on Pesach, in reality, the halacha should be that you should have to pay back nothing. To which the Gemara says, Hamani Rabbi Yossi Haglilihi. We'll say, whose opinion does this reflect? The opinion we saw a few days ago in Shir, it's Rabbi Yossi Haglili, Da Amar, Chametz bePesach muter ba'ana. Rabbi Yossi Haglili holds that Chametz on Pesach is muter ba'ana. Rabbi Yossi, remember again, this was part of the four-way machlokes that we had a few days ago. Rabbi Yossi Haglili said dramatically again that there is no Isser Hana on Pesach. And therefore, again, according to the Yosef Lili, chametz on Pesach, in fact, does have a value. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, emos seifa. But look at the end of the Mishnah. B'meizid pater minat tashlumin midimei eitzim. That if you consume chametz truma or trumas chametz on Pesach, if you did it b'meizid, you're pater from tashlumin, from repayment, and ultimately, again, even from its value as firewood. But if indeed this is Rabbi Yossi Haglili, why would I be pater from tashlumin and from demei eitzim? To which they want to, I'll tell you why. Because Rabbi Yossi Haglili also is Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana. What does Rabbi Nechunya? Also, we saw this yesterday. The sign Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, how you also to make your purim kishabes l'tashlumin. Because as Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana holds, he holds that Yom Kippur is like Shabbos for compensation purposes. Let's remember again, this is Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana who says Kimlin b'dirabah minei. That if on Shabbos you burn down someone's field, then what's the halacha? Because that act of burning, of kindling the field, generates capital liability, a death penalty, and also financial liability. The death penalty sets aside any financial liability. So Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana would say, if you eat trumas chametz on Pesach b'mezid, I will say the punishment for consuming chametz b'mezid on Pesach is kares. So because of that, if Chas v'Shalom person eats trumas chametz b'mezid intentionally on Pesach, they're chayiv kares. That chayiv kares ultimately again goes ahead and sets aside any financial liability. So the Gemara says kithanoi. In reality, this entire discussion is a machlokes tana. I will say that the discussion of lefi mida or lefi damin. Do you pay value or volume? This is a machlokes tanaim. Here we go. The Gemara says, Ha'ocha trumas chametz bePesach patra min hatashlumin umidmei eitzim dir Rabbi Akiva. Both say now a new opinion. Rabbi Akiva holds that halacha l'maisa, if you eat trumas chametz on Pesach, you are pater. Right? Rabbi say this disagrees with the Mishnah. Right? The Mishnah, obviously, as the Gemara just mentioned, the Mishnah which says that if you eat trumas chametz b'shogeg on Pesach, that you are going to pay keren and chomesh. The Gemara just suggested reflects the view of Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, who holds that you can get benefit from chametz on Pesach, and therefore again, trumas chametz has a value on Pesach. Now the Gemara quotes another opinion, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva holds that halacha l'maisa, if you eat trumas chametz on Pesach, you are pater. You are pater. You're pater from keren, you're pater from chomesh, and you're pater ultimately again, even for paying for the value of that trumas chametz as firewood. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri mechayiv. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, no, you're chayiv. Amol Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, v'chi mahana yesh lo ba. So Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, but tell me, what hana does the Kohen ultimately again have with this truma? To which the Gemara says, I'm sorry. So we'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. It's Rashi in the wide lines, 5 lines in. L'kohen b'truma t'mea shasura b'achila l'kohen v'zar achla zar shogig mishalim keren l'chomesh t'leka demand the palagastam disnan le'el echad truma Torah ve'echad truma t'mea v'taima mishum delefi mida mishalim. Okay, fine. So Rabbi Akiva, we'll explain the question in just a moment, but Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, v'chi mahana yesh lo ba. Ultimately, again, he says, what hana is there? What hana is there? Now, what Rabbi Akiva is really asking Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is at the end of the day, chametz on Pesach is aser. So what benefit has the person who has consumed the truma really gotten? Amar lo Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Rabbi Akiva, umahana yesh li ochal truma t'meya b'shar kol yemos hashana shemishalim. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says back to Rabbi Akiva, but one second, you can make the same argument even during the rest of the year. If a Yisrael consumes truma t'meya, what benefit is he getting? I will say when they say what benefit is he getting, what they really mean is what benefit is that Yisrael depriving the Kohen of? You see, when Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, why should Yisrael be chayiv for consuming trumas chametz on Pesach? After all, again, what is he depriving the Kohen of, right? The Kohen's not being deprived of anything. The Kohen's not permitted to eat this anyway. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says back to Rabbi Akiva, well, tell me, what about during the year that a Yisrael goes ahead and eats truma t'meya? What is he depriving the Kohen of? Amar lo, no, Rabbi Akiva says it's not a fair comparison. Im amrit b'truma t'meya b'shayim mos hashana sha'afa b'she'im bo heter achila yesh bo heter hasaka tomar b'zeh she'im lo ba lo heter achila lo heter hasaka. So Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, that's not a fair comparison. You see, when a Yisrael eats truma t'meya throughout the year, he is still depriving the Kohen of something. What is he depriving the Kohen of? The ability to use the truma t'meya as firewood. Because even though a Kohen can't eat truma t'meya, he absolutely could use it as fuel for his fire. And when the Yisrael consumes that, he is depriving the Kohen of that right. But on Pesach, chametz is fundamentally useless. And as such, when the Yisrael consumes the trumas chametz on Pesach, he's really not depriving the Kohen of anything. If he's not depriving the Kohen of anything, then why would there be any type of obligation for some level of compensatory damages? Halamazedoma. What could this be compared to? The trumas tusim va'anovim, like truma of berries. Literally, again, tusim are berries, anovim are grapes. Shenitma, that became tamei. She'in lo ba lo heter achila v'lo heter asaka. So we'll say, interestingly enough, if a Yisrael were to eat truma, right, a berry truma or grape truma, or I should say, right, truma grapes or truma berries, which became tamei, interestingly enough, the halacha is that the Yisrael is not chayiv for anything. Why is it not chayiv? Because they're both saying truma berries or truma grapes, which became tamei, are totally useless. Why are they useless? A, they can't be consumed, and B, they're useless for fuel as a fire. So they're useless. They're useless for fuel, right? You can't use them for anything. So we'll say ultimately, again, interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Akiva therefore posits any time. Let me say differently. A Yisrael is only going to be chayiv if he actively deprives the coin of something, which makes sense, right? If I consume the coin's truma, and by doing so I deprive the coin of use of that truma, that's when I'm going to be chayiv karen and chomesh. But if technically speaking, my active illegal consumption does not actually deprive the coin of anything, why should I have to pay? So this was Rabbi Akiva's argument. If a Yisrael eats trumas chametz, why should he be chayiv to pay anything? He's not depriving the coin of anything. The coin can't use it anyway. He can't use it to eat. He can't eat it, and he can't use it for fuel in his fire because that's hana. To which the Gemara says, and Rabbi Akiva says, this should be just like if Yisrael eats truma berries or truma grapes that became tamei, in which case the kohen can't eat them anyway. They're not usable for fuel, and therefore the zar, the non-kohen, shouldn't be chayiv. To which the Gemara says, okay, when is this so? B'mafresh truma v'echnitza. Ava mafresh trumas chametz divrei kol ina kedosha. But say, by the way, the Gemara just says this whole discussion is just an aside. That when can you ever? The Gemara just sets up the case. When can you ever have? When do you have a case of trumas chametz? That's only when the truma was first designated as regular truma, and then subsequently became chametz. But I will say on Pesach, you can't designate chametz as truma because such a designation ultimately, again, would not actually take effect. Okay, that's just an aside. So so therefore, again, I just want to point out that the discussion ultimately, again, of midah versus mishkal, right? Value versus volume, that discussion is still on the table. The Gemara says, Vaytanya idach, another brayso, v'nasan hakohen es hakodesh. So we'll say the pasuk says the kohen, the whole was v'ish kiyoch al kodesh b'shkaga v'yosef chamish yisrael v'nasan hakohen es hakodesh. Okay, so we'll say this is talking about the pasuk of illegal consumption of consecrated items. So what will happen? You go ahead and you give, if you go and you eat kodesh, you do it accidentally, you pay back the karen, the principal, plus an additional fifth, v'nasan hakohen es hakodesh, and you will give back to the kohen the kodesh. The Gemara says, davar haroi lios kodesh. This only applies to something which is fit to become kodesh. Prat li ochal trumas chametz bePesach. Shepata minata shulman eats in divrei Elazar ben Yaakov. Suppose another brayso that supports this idea. So this comes to exclude which case, if a person goes ahead and ate trumas chametz on Pesach, that he is pater from everything. Pater from everything, because at the end of the day, this is very interesting. The Torah says, "V'nasan hakohen es hakodesh" tells me that I have to repay something that is capable of becoming kodesh. So if I consume chametz on trumas chametz on Pesach, and I were to try to go ahead and repay trumas chametz on Pesach, such an act of repayment ultimately again would be irrelevant, would not take effect. Therefore, again, I'm not chayiv. Rabbi Elazar chamsa mechayiv. Rabbi Elazar says, no, if you consume trumas chametz on Pesach, you are chayiv. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Rabbi Elazar chamsa v'chi mahana yesh lo ba. So Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, I don't understand. How can you tell me that halacha l'maaseh you're chayiv, a Yisrael is chayiv for consuming trumas chametz on Pesach? Rabbi say, remember again, the only time you're chayiv to pay back karen and chomesh, principal and penalty fifth, is when you've deprived the kohen of something. If there is trumas chametz on Pesach, what have I deprived the kohen of? He can't eat it and he can't get benefit from it. To which the Gemara says, Amar lo Rabbi Elazar chamsa, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, v'chi mahana yesh lo li'ochel truma tzemeh b'shayim mos hashana shemeshayim. Suppose it's a similar conversation we had before. So Rabbi Elazar chamsa says, Elazar, tell me, if Yisrael eats truma tzemeh during the year, what does he deprive the kohen of? No, that's not fair. Amrlo im amrat truma tameya b'shaimos hashana she'afa bi she'ein blo ba heter achila yesh lo ba heter hasaka. Tomar bizu she'ein lo ba lo heter achila v'lo heter hasaka. That's not a fair comparison, I will say, because if Yisrael eats truma tameya throughout the rest of the year, he does deprive the Kohen of something. What does he deprive the Kohen of? The right to go ahead and use that truma tameya as fuel. So there is a use for truma tameya during the year. So if the Yisrael consumes it, he deprives the Kohen from using it as fuel. But yet again, if halach l'maisa, he goes ahead and he consumes trumas chametz, that's not usable by the Kohen at all. To which the Gemara says, Amarlo af bezu yesh ba heter asaka. Ultimately, again, so says Rabbi Elazar Chamsa, even by trumas chametz, the Kohen could use it as fuel. What does that mean? Shemratz ha-Kohen maritzev nekalba o masika tachas tavshilos. Rabbi said this keeps coming up again. Obviously, Rabbi Elazar Chamsa holds like Rabbi Yossi Haglili that halacha l'maisa, again, there is a heter hana of chametz on Pesach. So if you subscribe to the notion that there is a heter hana, that you can get benefit from chametz on Pesach, then einach inami, even when the Yisrael consumes trumas chametz on Pesach, there is this ability. He is depriving the Kohen of something, to be the ability to use it as food, the ability to use it as fuel, and in this case, the ability to give it to his animal, to his dog, ultimately again as food. So therefore, I will say, again, just before we turn the page, so what we begin to see is, first of all, this discussion, this position of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, that halacha l'maisa, one is permitted to go ahead and get benefit from chametz on Pesach, even though we know we do not accept that position. Halacha l'maisa, it keeps on resurfacing in the sugya. That's Aleph. Beis, again, I've also remember, again, we're still hyper-focused on the same issue, which is, again, value versus volume. When you go ahead and you consume truma, so at the end of the day, what am I obligated to repay? Am I obligated to repay the measure of what it is, the amount that I consumed, or am I obligated to pay back the value of what I consumed? Again, so that still continues. Amud Beis, Amra Baye, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri, Kulu Sfira Lahu Chametz bePesach Aser Bana. Shabbos Abaye says, based on what we just saw on Amud Aleph, we would say the following: Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri all agree, because also we quoted all of them just on Amud Aleph, all agree that Chametz on Pesach is Aser Bana. That's what they all agree on. Ubaha Pligi. And here's what they argue about, I will say. Here's what they argue about. Rabbi Akiva Savlafi Dam Mishalim. Rabbi Akiva says that when a Yisrael illegally consumes truma, he has to pay back the value of that which he consumed. Not the measurement, not the volume, but the value. Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri Savar, Lefi Mida Mishalim. Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri says, no, you pay back the measure, right? The amount, not the value, but rather the volume of what it is that you consumed. Simar says, okay, it kind of sounds pshita. That's obvious. Sounds like exactly what we said before in the Gemara. What would you have thought? Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri Namik, Rabbi Akiva Sirle. So say you might have thought that Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri holds like Rabbi Akiva, and just like they both hold that chametz is aser ba'ana, therefore halacha l'maisa. Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri also agrees with Rabbi Akiva that you pay back lefi damim, you pay back the value. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, read that again out. Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri, Rabbi Akiva Sirle, damar lefi damim mishalim, v'hasam hainu taima dekamechayiv. Mishum disavarla Rabbi Yossi Haglili damer chametz bePesach muter ba'ana. And maybe the reason why Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri says that halacha l'maisa you do have to pay back chametz trumas, maybe because he holds like Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who holds that chametz on Pesach is muter ba'ana, and therefore the item has a value. Kamash no. Kamash that's not the case. So, but maybe that is the case. Maybe that's a good svara. Imkain nedra le Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri Rabbi Akiva kiechi di mahadli Rabbi Elazar v'chams Rabbi Elazar and Yaakov. If that's the case, I both say, then ultimately again Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri should have said back to Rabbi Akiva, just as Rabbi Elazar Chamsa said back to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Fine. So both say, so okay, so that goes ahead and ends that. So both say, halacha l'maisa. How do we paskin? So first of all, again, we know that we reject the view of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, and chametz on Pesach is aser ba'ana. So we'll say there's a number of shilas that we have to deal with. Obviously, we'll deal with the Mishnah's core shaila about halacha l'maisa. What do you do if you consume trumas chametz on Pesach? But before we tackle that, halacha l'maisa. So, what is the halacha concerning repayment of truma? If a Yisrael goes ahead and consumes truma not on Pesach, on a regular Wednesday, a Yisrael consumes the truma of a Kohen, so how does he pay back? Is it midah or mishkal? Is it measurement or is it value? So we'll say, listen to this. So the Rambam Paskins, this is in Hilchos Trumas, Parak Yud in Hilchos Trumas. A lot of interesting halachas here actually that I hope we'll get to one of these days. So at the end of Hilchos Trumas, Rabbosai, at the end of Hilchos Trumas. So this is Mamash's last halacha. This is in Parak Yud halacha Chavav. Uli Olam, this is literally the last lines of the parak. Uli Olam Eino Mishalim Ela Lefi Damim. So both say, so number one, we paskin that when you go ahead and you pay back the truma you consumed, you pay back the value of the truma. Eino Mishalim Ela Lefi Damim Shahaisa Shave B'Shas Achila. That it was, but it will say, here's what's interesting. You pay back the value as it was established at the time of consumption. And therefore, bein shehuzla b'shas tashlumin, bein shehogra. Therefore, I will say so this is very important because it's quite possible that that there's some amount of time between the time of consumption and the time of repayment, which means that it's also possible that the value of what you consumed changed. Either went up in value, went down in value. So what we look at is the value of what you consumed at the time you consumed it. I will say this is not unique by truma. This is what the Gemara said before. This is the halacha by theft. Right? Remember, this is a case of theft. Anytime you go ahead and you steal from someone or you damage someone, so damages are assessed at the time that the damage or the theft was committed. So halacha l'maisa the Rambam Paskins, we pay back lefi damin. If Yisrael eats truma, halacha l'maisa, you pay back the value, not the volume, and the value is established at the actual time of consumption. Beautiful. Says Ha'ochel kizayis trum mashalim karen b'chomesh. We'll say if you go ahead, another interesting sugya. If you go ahead and you eat a kizayis of truma, so we'll say, Am Yisrael, I go ahead and I eat a kizayis of my Kohen friend's truma. So what's the halach? Mashalim karen b'chomesh. You have to pay back a karen and chomesh. You have to pay back principal and the fifth. Then I will say now the novel. Just understand what the Tanakama, what the Rabbanan are saying over here is. It sounds like what it's saying is in order for me to be chayiv karen and chomesh, I must eat at least a kizayis. Right? If I eat less than a kizayis of truma, I will not be chayiv karen and chomesh. So you have to eat at least a kizayis. Abba Shal Omer, Ad Sheba Shava Pruta. Abba Shal says no, you don't even have to eat a kizayis. All you have to eat is at least a pruta's worth of truma. It's an interesting machlokes. What is the minimum amount of truma consumption in order to trigger keren chomesh liability? Tanakama, a kizayis, abishol, a pruta. So we'll say, I just want to point out, what's very interesting is it's the same machlokes, right? It's the same machlokes of value. Isn't that fascinating? It's the same thing. Is it pruta or a kizayis? Is it damim or is it good? So Gemara says as follows. So my Tanakama, what's the reason the Tanakama who says that you have to eat a kizayis? Omerkra, the ishkiyocha kodesh bishkaga, v'achila b'kizayis. Because also when the Torah speaks about illegal consumption of truma, it talks about an act of consumption, eating. And whenever we speak about an act of eating, the minimum shear for eating is what? Is a kizayis. Therefore, the obligation for karen and chomesh is only triggered if you eat at least a kizayis of truma. So the Gemara says, "V'abishol my time." What's Abishol's logic? Why does he say no, not a kizayis but a pruta? Amar kra v'nosan. As opposed to the pasuk says, "V'nosan lakohen hakodesh," which talks about the repayment of consumed truma. It says "v'nosan." Ve'einasina, something is only considered to be a substantive act of giving if what? Pachos mishaver pruta. It's not called nasina if you give less than a shaver pruta. Okay. So what does Abishol do with the fact that it says achila hahu prat lemazik? Interestingly enough, he says this comes to exclude a case of damages. But this is actually very interesting. That halacha l'maisa, if I damage a Kohen's truma, right? I burn his truma, that doesn't trigger an obligation of keren and chomesh. Interestingly enough, it's only an act of consumption. So the prat lamazik udasa, the Tanakh, which is interesting. Rashi says prat lamazik truma shel kohen afilu b'shogi shel mishalim chomesh ala keren kishar mazik tlon. And I want to point out, obviously, if I burn the kohen's truma, I have to pay damages. In other words, I've damaged someone's property, but I don't have an obligation of chomesh. The penalty fifth is only for an act of consumption. So the Gemara says, "Hudas fine." Prat lamazik the Tanakh hudasa the Tanakama nami aksivinas. So also the Tanakama who says that you have to normally consume a kizayis. So halacha l'maisa again. What does he say? What does he say about the vinnasan? So the Gemara says, he uses that to teach me that halacha l'maisa, that the only item you could repay with is something that has the ability, capacity, or potential to become truma. Good. Bose, how do we paskin in this case? There's going to be a lot of hilchos trumas today. So how do we paskin? So Bose, this is the same parak halacha beis. So here the Rambam says that halacha l'maisa, he says ve'echara ochal truma tzimeh b'shkaka ve'echara ochal tar mishan ker v'chomesh ve'eno chay chomesh ad sheyochal kizayis. So ultimately, again, the Gemara says that we paskin like the Tanakama, that you are only chayiv for keren and chomesh, only chayiv for principal and penalty fifth, if you consumed at least a kizayis of truma. Good. Tan Rabbanon, let's just go a little bit weiter. Tan Rabbanon, ha'ochel truma pachos mikizayis mishalim esa keren ve'eno mishalim esa chomesh. So say we learned in a brayso that if a person eats truma less than a kizayis, this is what we just said. Now we pass like the Tanakama, you have to eat at least a kizayis. If you ate less than a kizayis, you pay back keren, but you don't pay back chomesh. So you pay back keren, Brisa says, because you committed an act of damage, but you don't pay back chomesh. The penalty fifth is only for the consumption of the kizayis. So hey, dummy, what's the case? Idales beishave pruta. If what you consumed is not worth a pruta, then karenami lo l'shadin. So there's no compensatory damages if you did damage less than a pruta. Right, there's no damages for that. The isbei shavar pruta, and if what you consumed was shavar pruta, even though it's less than a kizayis, chomesh nami l'shalim, then ultimately I should have to pay the chomesh as well. Li'olam the isbei shavar pruta. In reality, what I consumed, although it was less than a kizayis, it was a shavar pruta. Va'afilu hachi kevan the less bei kizayis mishalim esakar mena mishalim esachomesh. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the halacha is, the Gemara says that if I consumed something that was less than a kizayis, even if it was shavar pruta, I don't have to pay the chomesh. I'll have to pay the keren, but I won't have to pay the chomesh, because the halacha is you only pay principal plus the penalty fifth if you consume the kizayis. Amru Rabbanak made Rababa hadol kabashol. This obviously doesn't reflect the view of Abashol. How so? Di'i ka Abashol, because if it was like Abashol, ha'amar kevan sheyesh b'shaver pruta, Abashol says that once the truma being consumed is worth a pruta, afagav the less bei kizayis, even if it doesn't have a kizayis, that will trigger an obligation for keren and chomesh. Amar lehurav papa filutem abashol tarti boy. So this is very interesting. To which the Gemara says it turns out that abashol actually requires both. In Abashol's view, in order for you to be chayiv keren and chomesh, the item being consumed must be a kizayis, and B, worth at least a pruta. Whereas the Tanakama holds that all it has to be is a kizayis. Umi by Abashol Tarti. Is that true that Abashol really requires both? What's it, just two more lines? V'hatnan Abashol Omer es sheish b'shavar pruta chay b'tashlumin es she'im b'shavar pruta chay b'tashlumin. Abashol says, if the truman question is worth a pruta, then you have to pay back keren and chomesh. If it's not worth a pruta, you don't have to pay back. Amru lo amru shavar pruta el le'inyan mi'ilas. Abashol, what are you talking about? Shavar Pruta is only a din by Me'ilah. Right? Me'ilah means illegal use of consecrated property. It's only by Me'ilah that in order to be chayiv, you need at least a Shavar Pruta. Aval Truma eno chayiv ad sheheba kizayis. But by Truma, you're chayiv for consumption, for Karen and Chomesh, as long as what you consumed has at least a kizayis. Ve'im isa kevan sheyesh bo kizayis mi boile. And if it was correct, then you should say, once it has a kizayis and is worth a Shavar Pruta, therefore tiyufta. Therefore, we'll say it turns out that we refute that position. We're back to what we said before, namely that Abba Shaul holds that in order to be chayv for Karen and Chomesh, all you need is what? All you need is the value of a pruta, even if it doesn't have a kizayis. Therefore, we'll say that's the machlokes. Tanakama holding that in order to be chayv for Karen and Chomesh, you have to eat a kizayis of truma independent of the value, even if it's not shavar pruta. Abba Shaul saying it must be shavar pruta. Rambam paskins like the Tanakama that in order to trigger an obligation, ultimately again of Karen and Chomesh, one must consume at least a kizayis of truma. All right, Tabo say shkoyach. We'll stop over here for today. We'll Emirat Hashem pick up with Af Rav Papa Hadir Bey Emirat Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach, Tabo say.